Good morning and welcome to Arise News Now. I'm Gavin Ramjohn in London. It's Friday the 12th of July and our top story at this hour. The US State Department has warned that politically motivated arrests and detentions in Egypt must stop. It says the country's move to democracy must be inclusive and crackdowns on opposition voices are counterproductive. It comes as big Friday demonstrations are planned by supporters of the ousted President Mohamed Morsi.
The arrests we've seen, of course, over the past several days targeting specific groups are not in line with the national reconciliation that the interim government and military say they are pursuing. If politicized arrests and detentions continue, it is hard to see how Egypt will move beyond this crisis. That further emphasizes the point I was making about how all sides, an inclusive process would include all sides.
Jen Psaki, the State Department spokesperson there. Now, away from the protests in the streets, those calling for Mohamed Morsi to be reinstated are doing everything they can to make sure their side of the story reaches the world. Arise News' Will Took reports.
As supporters of ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi gather in Cairo, the media is the message. They have set up a media centre, complete with fast internet, as a way to offer an alternative to what they say is a predominantly anti-Morsi media.
We provide services to foreign journalists and correspondents. We have translators and an English section as well as other languages to make it easier for the foreigners to do their work. We also help them communicate with the leaders of the sit-in and the revolutionary youths.
After more than 50 pro-Morsi protesters were killed when the army opened fire on them on Monday, the independent media largely backed the military's side of events.
We try and provide a professional service, but the problem is that some associations, especially the local ones, sadly are exposed to interference and are led by the leaders of the coup. They are turning back the clock by censoring us or by denying journalist access.
While Morsi supporters call his overthrow a coup, the military says it was merely enforcing the will of the people after millions rallied on June the 30th to call for his resignation. Anti-Morsi voices may be strong in the media, but as Friday prayers approach, his supporters will be making their voices heard on the streets. Will Took, Arise News.
We're joined now on Skype by our current affairs journalist and blogger Erica Aisha Chavez, who's in Cairo. Erica, always a pleasure to speak to you. Are there any worries that these arrests could spark continued unrest?
Well, good morning. Since this is Friday, which is just a few hours before Friday prayers, we're anticipating that the streets will be more full near any place that we've had pro-Morsi demonstrations, particularly out by Rub al Adawiyah, which is one of the main thoroughfares between one part of Cairo and all of the sort of suburbs in the outside. So there'll be slower traffic and protests that extend from there for kilometers.
And what is the atmosphere like on the streets, Erica?
Well, in neighborhoods such as mine, I'm located in the heart of Cairo. Right now it's really sleepy, quiet. As soon as Friday prayer happens, the streets will be a little more busy. People will be going out and buying food. Since this is Ramadan, people are fasting throughout the day until sunset. After sunset is when everything begins. In neighborhoods that are smaller like this one, sort of a cluster with all of these big buildings and small streets, people are shopping, having fun, setting off fireworks, really festive. But in places like Rub al Adawiyah, they have wide streets that are currently full of protesters. And people have been coming from Upper Egypt, people are coming from the Nile Delta, everywhere to try to fill the streets there for protests until they say Morsi returns.
And what is the profile of the army? Are they visible on the streets or are they keeping a low profile?
Well, ever since June 30th, they have been in the streets. There's one particular place between here and, again, Rub al Adawiyah Mosque, where the pro-Morsi camp is, the street is lined with tanks. It's over by sort of a military installation, which is in the middle of Cairo. So you see them all over. You see them parked in places that are really important, near the 6th of October bridge, which goes between Tahrir and Zamalek, where a lot of the embassies are. they're sort of positioned everywhere. Now the police are coming back to working regularly, so we see regular police as well.
And what do we know of the ousted President Morsi? Is he being held somewhere?
We don't know where he's being held, as last I heard. However, recently the anti-Morsi camp has been trying to get the courts to look into a charge that he escaped prison during the 2011 protests.
And looking further afield, the Americans have said that there could be further arrests that are set to happen. They've spoken out against those arrests. Is that likely to happen? Will the army be making more arrests?
I believe they will. That's their modus operandi. This is what they do. They look at a certain group and they bring people in. But when they make arrests, oftentimes it's sort of just detention, questioning, and then people are often let go. They've detained hundreds of people who are in the Muslim Brotherhood group, but they often just ask them questions and let them go. A lot of these people are on charges of sort of angering people towards the public, charges of trying to get people to protest or engage in acts of violence, those sorts of things.
And how much do you think that they're taking notice of the wider world and what the Americans are saying?
I think people that write the checks in the military certainly care what America says if they have hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. But they also right now have other backers in the Gulf to give the government money. So perhaps they're willing to put it on the line a little more than they have been in the past. I'm not sure.
Erica Ayxa Chavez, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you during the news hour at 1 p.m. GMT. Thanks again. Now, demonstrators in Brazil have again clashed with police. It came at the end of a one-day strike. There have been disturbances over workers' rights, prices and transport in Brazil for the past month. Paul Chapman reports.
A largely peaceful one-day strike across Brazil descends into violence on the streets of Rio de Janeiro. The clashes between police and protesters erupted after Thursday's stoppage by tens of thousands trying to push workers' rights to the top of the national agenda. Some protesters said the police response was heavy-handed.
The struggle is about workers, orderly people. There was no need for the police to shoot tear gas in their faces. My wife and I had to flee in the midst of tear gas, pepper spray in our faces, even though we didn't participate in anything wrong. We were participating in a peaceful march.
The disruption from Thursday's protest throughout Brazil was limited compared to the mass demonstrations witnessed in June. More than 1 million people took to the streets then in the country's largest demonstrations in 2 decades. They were triggered by anger over public transport fare rises, demands for better public services and an end to corruption. President Dilma Rousseff's promised reforms and more investment in services as a result, but many doubt she can deliver before next year's elections.
Continues in China. A watermelon farmer was rescued from a flash flood in East China's Shandong province. The woman was found trapped in the middle of surging floodwater on Thursday morning in a tractor when she was on her way to sell watermelons to a local village. As water levels continued to rise, a fire crew made several attempts to free the tractor. Even getting a life jacket to the farmer was proving difficult. 3 men eventually managed to battle the fierce waves, tie a rope around the farmer's waist and pull her to safety. To Indonesia now, where the hunt is on for the inmates of a high-security prison who escaped last night. Protests over lack of drinking water and electricity are said to have spilled over into a full-blown jailbreak. A fire was started in a cell block that killed 2 prisoners and 2 prison guards. So far, soldiers and police have recaptured 64 convicts, but around 180 remain at large. Several of the escapees are thought to have links to an extremist group that carried out a series of church bombings in Sumatra. South African anti-apartheid veterans gathered Thursday on Lilileaf's farm in Rivonia to commemorate the raid 50 years ago that led to Nelson Mandela's life sentence. The raid also led to the arrests of most members of Mr. Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. President Jacob Zuma and other government officials attended the commemoration. Altogether, 18 members of the ANC were arrested on July the 11th. Most of the activists were then put on trial for treason and jailed on Robben Island. Mr. Mandela once used the farm as a hideout for his anti-apartheid efforts, and now it has been turned into a museum to commemorate the raid. A Saudi princess has been charged with bringing a Kenyan woman to the United States as a domestic servant and holding her against her will. And she could face more charges. A California prosecutor likened the case to slavery. Catherine Jackson reports.
Charged with human trafficking, a Saudi Arabian princess appears in a Santa Ana courtroom on Thursday. Mayshal Aleban is accused of bringing a Kenyan woman to the United States and holding her against her will as a servant in her Irvine home since May. Aleban allegedly paid the servant $220 a month while holding her passport and confining her to an apartment to cook, clean, and do laundry almost around the clock.
The contract was torn up, her visa was confiscated, and she was put to work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day.
Prosecutors say the 42-year-old princess hired the woman as a domestic servant in her family's palace in Saudi Arabia last year. Police arrested Aleban after the servant escaped and flagged down a bus driver. Authorities say they found 4 Filipino women in the home who also may have had their passports seized by Aleban's family. An investigation is underway into whether others were involved in the alleged human trafficking scheme.
The Quebec Premier has said the behaviour of a rail boss and train company are deplorable in the aftermath of a runaway oil train crash on Saturday. This comes after Canadian officials told the families of the 30 people still missing that they're all presumed dead. Jason Mansoret reports.
Quebec Premier Pauline Marois has lashed out at the rail company and its boss after their runaway train crashed. 24 bodies have so far been recovered in the blast zone and another 26 are presumed dead. Up to 60 people in total are feared to have died when the driverless train with 72 tankers of crude oil derailed and exploded in a fireball in Lac-Mégantic on Saturday. Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Rail Company President Ed Burkhardt visited the town on Wednesday to apologize. Quebec's premier says it's too little, too late.
I already commented on his behavior and the behavior of the company, and it was deplorable. To my mind, the leader of that firm should have been there on the spot at the beginning of this tragic accident. It seems to me that went without saying. He should have been there to better communicate with the population. They have many questions to ask, and also with the municipal authorities. They have all kinds of questions.
More than 200 investigators are working round the clock, sifting through the wreckage of what authorities say is a crime scene. The Quebec government is making $58 million worth of aid available to those affected by the accident. All but 200 of the 2,000 residents that fled their homes as the fires burned have now returned. Jason Mansoret, Arise News.
You're watching Arise News now. In sport, Ashton Agar is making the headlines in cricket. The 19-year-old Australian pulled his side from the brink of a batting collapse against England in the first Ashes test. The Aussies have a first innings lead of 65, but what's all the more remarkable is that Agar posted the highest score by a number 11 batsman in the history of test cricket. 98 runs off 101 balls, beating the West Indies' Tino Best. England resumed their second innings on 80 for 2 this morning. And the Brazilian stadium, the Maracanã, is known for being one of the most lively places in the world of football, but all that could be set to change. Officials are saying that fans could now be banned from standing up, taking their shirts off and playing musical instruments. The move's likely to cause an outcry in Brazil, with fears that the atmosphere will be dampened in wake of the country's modernisation before next year's World Cup. The Maracanã is regarded as the spiritual home of Brazilian football and was only reopened in June after a rebuilding programme plagued by delays and burgeoning costs. Well, that's all we've got time for now on Arise News Now. We'll keep you updated throughout the day. Thanks very much for watching.